Welcome to Dialogue. This is part of a series on dirty politics. The first episode exposed the stage, the second episode revealed machinery, and this episode presents documented, real-world cases, starting with COINTELPRO. So today, our mission is really to move past the abstract stuff, the frameworks and the general theory of how political manipulation works.
Right, we're getting into the specifics.
Exactly. We're moving directly to verified, officially acknowledged, and historically confirmed cases. These are moments where the tactics left the textbook and became, aggressive, state-sponsored action.
And we should be clear, we're looking at programs that were fully confirmed by congressional investigations, declassified files, the works. This isn't speculation.
Not at all.
And, when you really analyze these moments, these verified historical cases, a single powerful conclusion sort of guides everything. It's critical to keep this in mind.
Okay.
Dirty politics. It isn't actually about left-wing or right-wing ideology. At its core, it is fundamentally about power protecting itself.
It's nonpartisan in that sense.
Completely. It's about an entrenched system that starts to see widespread political dissent, even peaceful organizing, as a kind of existential threat, something that has to be neutralized.
So our goal here, for you listening, is to build some genuine awareness, not paranoia.
Right. Because by understanding these textbook cases, you realize that the most successful political manipulation, the most effective stuff, it often goes completely unnoticed until historians or investigators piece it all together, sometimes years later.
And that need for awareness is exactly why we're starting with COINTELPRO,
which stands for the Counterintelligence Program.
If you really want to understand how a political strategy can just repeat itself quietly across different times, different technologies, this is the blueprint.
It's the foundational text, in a way.
We're exploring how the state, using just, bureaucracy and plausible deniability, literally tried to dismantle organizations from the inside out.
And we really have to reinforce a core conclusion before we even start. This is not about left or right.
Absolutely not.
Dirty politics is about power protecting itself. It's about protecting its own legitimacy, and it doesn't matter who is in charge.
Our job here is just awareness.
That's it. Because the most effective political manipulation, it's always the kind that you don't realize you're even witnessing until the damage is already done.
And the hook here is so critical. COINTELPRO isn't really controversial because it was some big secret forever. The records are mostly out now.
Right. A lot of it has been declassified.
It's controversial because, fundamentally, it worked.
It really did.
This program successfully dismantled major, powerful domestic organizations. And they did it using methods that gave them the maximum plausible deniability.
And that's the genius of it. No single action, if you look at it in isolation, seems that extreme. But when you put them all together...
It destroyed entire movements. And they did it without needing martial law or mass arrests or any kind of overt repression.
It's what institutional political sabotage looks like when it's at its most disciplined. It uses the most mundane, boring mechanisms of government.
Like what?
Memos, the postal service, just sheer bureaucracy. And it uses all of that to achieve a radical internal collapse within a target group.
So today, we're going to unpack the specific methods, the actual playbook they used to make that happen.
Okay.
Let's unpack this and just start with a clear definition.
Yeah.
What exactly was COINTELPRO?
It stands for the Counterintelligence Program. And this wasn't some rogue operation. This was a formal, systematic FBI program.
Authorized at the highest levels.
Absolutely. It ran officially from 1956 to 1971.
That's a long time.
It is. And, while those dates mark the formal program, the techniques, the logic behind them, that stuff existed before, and it definitely survived long after the program was officially shut down.
So what was the official mandate? What did they say they were doing?
The official language, which is so important to understanding the intent, was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize any political organizations they deemed subversive.
Okay, that word right there, subversive. You just kind of glossed over it. But that seems like the whole game.
It is.
That distinction is absolutely critical when we talk about dirty politics. We're not talking about criminal conspiracy or, confirmed illegal acts. What do they mean by subversive?
That's the essential question, because that term shifts the entire focus. Subversive activity isn't necessarily illegal activity.
Right.
It's activity that challenges the fundamental legitimacy or the structure of existing power. When you look at the groups they targeted, the goal wasn't just to lock up criminals. The goal was to eliminate any activity that showed high potential for systemic change. And what does that look like?
I'm guessing Effective organization?
Exactly. Highly effective organization, unity, and successful mobilization. That was the real target.
So the actual crime they were investigating wasn't a political goal itself, but the potential for that goal to be achieved. Is that right?
That's a perfect way to put it.
So the FBI was essentially policing unity itself.
In many ways, yes. I mean, think about it strategically. If you're just some fringe group, disorganized, shouting into the wind, the power structure doesn't need to commit huge resources to stop you.
You're not a threat. You're ineffective.
You're ineffective. But if you are successfully organizing nationwide voter registration drives, or setting up community health clinics, or mobilizing hundreds of thousands of people against a major war,
Then you become a genuine structural threat.
you do. Simply because you are effective at organizing people. That capability, that potential for unity, that's what made them a target.
That really shows dirty politics at its most strategic, doesn't it? The program was basically a mechanism for the state to destroy movements without ever having to ban the ideas themselves.
Precisely. They completely avoided the politically messy, difficult process of formal censorship or mass arrests.
Because that would immediately cast the government as the obvious villain.
Right, it would look bad. So instead, they opted for internal dissolution. The whole objective was to make the movements collapse under their own weight.
To manufacture betrayal, infighting.
Financial burnout, organizational paralysis, all of it.
Which brings us to the key strategic takeaway. Dirty politics works best when institutional power never looks like the antagonist.
It never looks like it's involved.
Right. If an organization collapses because of infighting or leadership burnout, the media and the public, they just naturally conclude that the organization itself was dysfunctional from the start.
And that is the ultimate strategic goal of plausible deniability. To make the internal collapse seem inevitable, organic, and entirely self-inflicted.
It lets the state just step away from the crime scene and say,
We just watch them fall apart. It's incredibly low-risk, high-reward sabotage.
so if the metric for being targeted wasn't really criminality but effectiveness, who did the state see as so threatening they needed to be dismantled from the inside?
Well, there are four main categories of groups that COINTELPRO really focused on.
Let's get into them.
Let's start with the first, and maybe the most well-known group, the civil rights organizations.
Okay, so we're talking about the bedrock movements here.
We are. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE.
These were groups pushing for desegregation, voting rights, and critically nonviolent resistance. Their methods were moral, they were legal, they were public. So if they're nonviolent and legal, what was the specific threat that required their internal destruction?
Their crime, in the eyes of the state, was their terrifying effectiveness, their ability to mobilize and build a moral consensus.
They were just too good at it.
They were too good at it. They were successfully organizing boycotts, freedom rides, massive voter registration drives, things that fundamentally challenged the entire economic and social order, especially in the South.
And that's why the program targeted key leaders.
It is. And no leader was targeted with more intensity than Martin Luther King Jr.
The focus on King, a nonviolent leader, is still just stunning to look back on. We know the FBI famously labeled him, what was the exact quote?
The quote was, "The most dangerous Negro leader in the future of this nation."
That is not the language you use for a harmless agitator.
It's chilling, because the threat perception wasn't tied to armed rebellion at all. The threat was King's ability to articulate moral arguments, to unify all these different segments, the church, students, labor movements.
He was shifting the moral center of the country.
Fundamentally. So they were actively seeking to compromise his marriage, expose his private life, anything to force him out of the civil rights leadership. The goal wasn't just to watch him.
It was to eliminate him as a viable leader.
Simply because he was so effective at organizing millions of people.
So if King represented the moral nonviolent wing that needed what you might call a moral assassination, the next target, the Black Panther Party, represented a shift towards something more revolutionary.
And that required immediate operational dismantling. The Panthers were treated as perhaps the #1 domestic threat overall.
Why, specifically?
They were a high-priority target because they combined these radical critiques of capitalism and policing with a dual mission that was incredibly effective on the ground.
Right, they advocated for armed self-defense, yes, but they also ran these extensive community programs.
The survival programs, free breakfast for children, free health clinics, education programs.
And that combination, the radical ideology, paired with practical, immediate community service, That's what made them such a potent force, right?
It's what made them so dangerous to the status quo. They were simultaneously fighting systemic power and filling the vacuum left by the state's failure to provide for its own citizens.
So that's why leaders like Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale were such high priorities.
They were. But the one person who seemed to genuinely terrify the FBI was Fred Hampton, the chairman of the Illinois chapter.
Why Hampton specifically? I mean, he was young, charismatic, powerful, sure. But why did he rise to the level of an immediate existential threat in the government's eyes?
The documents make it pretty clear. It was because he was doing the one thing that violates the first rule of maintaining power.
Which is?
He was destroying internal divisions. Hampton was successfully building what he called the Rainbow Coalition.
This wasn't just a black power organization.
Not at all. It was an active coalition of black-white groups like the Young Patriots, who were core abolition migrants Latino groups like the Young Lords, and other working-class activists, all together.
A multiracial working-class movement, all united under one political agenda. I mean, that level of unity fundamentally undermines a power structure that relies on keeping those groups fighting each other.
Exactly. When the poor unite across racial lines, the traditional system of control through racial and economic division is immediately in danger. That single act of successful unity made Hampton an operational priority for neutralization.
Which, as we know from history, tragically resulted in his assassination.
It's the old principle laid bare. When your opponents manage to unite, they are no longer easily conquerable.
That's a powerful and chilling insight. Okay, moving to the third category. The anti-war and New Left groups. This would be Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS, and various anti-Vietnam War coalitions.
Right, and campus activist networks across the country. These groups were very different from the Panthers, but they were just as effective in their own way.
How so?
They challenged the very legitimacy of the state's foreign policy. They were focused on the Vietnam War, the draft, military authority. And they weren't fringe. They were growing incredibly fast, attracting huge numbers of mainstream middle-class young people.
And when a movement grows that quickly among the educated and starts to erode public trust in key institutions like the military, COINTELPRO has to step in.
Yeah.
What were the specific tactics against a group like SDS?
Well, against the New Left, the focus was mainly on amplifying existing ideological fault lines.
So finding the cracks and prying them open.
Exactly. SDS was massive, but it was organizationally fragile. They were constantly debating strategy. Should we focus on community organizing, campus reform, outright revolution?
And Asians provocateurs were key here.
Instrumental. They would push for wildly radical or dangerous actions like bombings or vandalism, which would then delegitimize the entire movement in the eyes of moderate students and the public.
So they pushed the most extreme voices to the front.
We see documented efforts to promote the most revolutionary and often the most destructive factions within SDS, which ultimately led to that catastrophic split that birthed groups like the Weathermen.
That's fascinating. So instead of having to destroy them from the outside, the state just paid people to throw gasoline on their existing internal fires until the whole organization just consumed itself.
It was an incredible return on their investment. And finally, you have the fourth category, the socialist and communist organizations.
Specifically, the Communist Party USA and the Socialist Workers' Party.
Right. And this targeting was maybe the most sustained. It goes all the way back to the program's official start in 1956.
So what did COINTELPRO do against these groups that traditional counterespionage wasn't already handling?
That's a great question. While some of these groups did have historical ties to foreign governments, the program aggressively targeted purely domestic, legal political activity.
You weren't just looking for spies.
No. The goal was containment and disruption. They often didn't distinguish carefully between actual espionage and just legal political organizing. For the Socialist Workers' Party, for instance, this meant intense efforts to disrupt their election campaigns.
How'd they do that?
They'd interfere with their ability to rent venues for rallies, they'd sabotage their printing presses, which is the lifeblood of any political organization back then. The goal was just to prevent them from ever gaining mainstream legitimacy.
Keep them on the sidelines forever, even if they were legally running candidates for office.
That's it. So the pattern is crystal clear. Whether you're nonviolent, providing community aid, or running for office, if you show the potential for effective organization that challenges the status quo, you become a target.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics, how they did it. Okay, this is where the information becomes not just interesting, but really instructional for understanding how political sabotage works. This is the operational playbook, the actual methods they used to make sure these effective organizations would self-destruct.
The first, and maybe the most pervasive tactic, was infiltration. But this was a level of infiltration that went way beyond just simple observation or intelligence gathering.
Right. We're not talking about a spy taking notes in the back of a room. We're talking about active operational assets.
Highly active.
So if an informant is getting paid to infiltrate a group, what does that operational steering actually look like in practice?
It looks like maximizing internal contradictions. Informants were often positioned high enough in the organization to actively steer the group's money or its behavior.
So they would encourage the most radical, unsustainable, or potentially illegal actions.
Exactly. Actions that had a low chance of success but a very high risk of prosecution.
Can you give an example of what kind of action an informant might encourage?
Sure. Imagine a small activist group trying to fundraise. An informant might encourage the leader to spend their very limited funds on something highly visible but financially reckless.
Like what?
Maybe buying an unnecessary van or funding a massive, unplanned demonstration across state lines without any of the needed infrastructure. They would also push letters toward petty, easily prosecutable crimes.
Like defacing minor property.
Or purchasing a weapon illegally. Actions that led to arrests that were very easy to defend in court.
The genius of this setup, or maybe the horror of it, is the final outcome. Once the informant pushes the group toward an illegal act, arrests follow.
Inevitably.
And from the outside, when the FBI or local police make that arrest, it looks completely legitimate. It just looks like law enforcement stopping criminals.
Exactly. The action looks clean on paper. But the reality is that the criminal act itself was often engineered, encouraged, or even financed by the state actor inside the organization.
It's weaponized plausible deniability.
It is. The state creates the crime, then arrests the perpetrator, and the public has no idea that the offense was manufactured. It ensures that power never looks like the villain, just the neutral enforcer of the law.
The second major tactic was just outright psychological warfare, psyops. And this tactic targeted the most precious resource of any movement.
Which is trust.
Trust.
Trust is the absolute oxygen. Without it, organization is impossible. Fascinating is how pedestrian the methods were. They used the mail system.
It sounds laughably low-tech.
But the psychological impact was devastating because of the context. These weren't just general insults. They were surgically precise.
What would they say in these letters?
They'd accuse key, high-profile leaders of being informants themselves, or of embezzling money from the organization. Or they'd claim they were having illicit affairs with members of rival factions. The letters just capitalized on pre-existing tensions and human insecurities.
I mean, just imagine it. You're a leader trying to organize a nationwide movement. You're constantly under surveillance. You're facing all this external pressure. And then you get an anonymous note detailing a private conversation that only 3 people were in on.
And it suggests your second in command just sold you out to the police.
Even if you don't instantly believe it, you now have to spend all this valuable time and energy investigating your own people, defending your reputation, dealing with paranoia.
And that is the entire point. Movements don't typically die when they're attacked by an external enemy. They die when they turn inward and start fighting each other.
And the low-tech effectiveness of political gossip and rumor spreading.
Especially when it's amplified by a motivated state actor who has access to privileged information. It's an incredibly powerful weapon. Anonymity lets the state inject poison directly into the organization's veins without ever having to take responsibility.
Which leads directly into the third tactic, which really leverages that lack of trust, engineered factionalism and internal conflict.
Right. So if a movement had 2 strong leaders who maybe disagreed on strategy sometimes, the FBI wouldn't try to defeat them both.
They would pit them against each other.
They'd pit them against each other until the split was irreparable. This was a systematic strategy. They'd use the anonymous letters, selective leaks, or even informant behavior to support one faction while undermining the other.
And they would exaggerate minor ideological differences.
Which are inevitable in any large organization. They'd blow them up into these existential movement-ending splits.
So what was the key to success here? It can't just be creating the split. Political groups split all the time.
The key was ensuring that reconciliation never happened once the split started. Agents would actively block any attempts at mediation. If the program could ensure that the differences between, say, 2 branches of the Black Panther Party were amplified past the point of no return,
then the whole organization would splinter and dedicate its remaining resources to fighting itself.
division was the weapon. It's highly efficient. Why spend all this money on large-scale external repression when you can spend a fraction of that on paper, postage, and a couple of well-placed informants to make the group cannibalize itself?
It's the ultimate high-leverage, low-cost sabotage.
And the fourth tactic focused on legal harassment as a means of pure systemic exhaustion.
And from what the analysis shows, this wasn't really about getting actual criminal convictions, though they take them. The main goal was the process itself.
Slowing, frustrating, and exhausting the opposition.
What did this harassment look like, beyond just surveillance?
This is a deep one. We are talking about the weaponization of bureaucracy. This included endless, frivolous subpoenas demanding they produce thousands of pages of records unrelated to any actual charge. It involved constant, intrusive financial audits of nonprofit organizations or leaders' personal tax returns. It meant the state initiating court cases that would drag on for years with no resolution, requiring key leaders to spend weeks preparing for depositions instead of organizing.
So if you're a rising activist, instead of being on a college campus or a picket line, you're sitting in a lawyer's office spending hundreds of dollars an hour defending against a demand to produce 5 years of receipts for a community bake sale.
Exactly. The goal was exhaustion. The process becomes the punishment. The sheer emotional and financial toll of that kind of sustained, nonstop pressure is enough to sideline anyone.
And it specifically targeted people in their early career stages.
It did. To ensure that the burden of fighting the system made a normal life holding a job, raising a family, staying financially stable, impossible. They aimed to make a political career untenable through pure process fatigue.
So the state wins without ever having to ban the movement. It just starves it of time, money, and mental energy.
And finally, we have media manipulation. This was the external flank of the MVAC, making sure that whatever internal damage was happening was justified in the public eye.
The FBI didn't just sit back and wait for news coverage. They actively controlled the narrative through selective leaks to the press. They were masters of framing.
They absolutely were. If the Black Panther Party opened a successful free health clinic, COINTELPRO would leak a story to a local paper focusing only on an inflammatory quote from one of the party's leaders about revolution.
So they didn't leak details about the voter registration drives.
No, they leaked information designed to frame activists as paranoid criminals. They emphasized extremism and completely ignored all the positive community work.
So the public only sees the caricature, the angry, unstable radical, and not the community organizer trying to feed children or register voters.
That's right. And this tactic eroded public sympathy. It ensured that even when movements were making powerful, legitimate arguments, say, against the war or for economic justice, they lost their legitimacy in the eyes of the general public.
If the public sees the leaders as unstable extremists, their political goals just become irrelevant and easy to dismiss.
And that was the point.
It is so easy to look at these tactics, the anonymous letters, the rumors, the engineered splits, and just imagine them as this dark, shadowy operation run by a couple of rogue agents.
Right, like something out of a spy movie.
But the analysis reminds us of a really chilling truth that we need to spend some time on. This was dirty politics as administration.
That is the great paradox of institutional sabotage. Every single COINTELPRO action required standard government procedure.
What do you mean?
Detailed memos justifying the action, approvals from superiors at FBI headquarters in Washington, and formal reports detailing the success or failure of the disruption.
Can you just imagine being the field agent writing that memo? Recommendation: send anonymous letter to Party A, suggesting financial impropriety by Leader B. Objective is destabilization.
And then the follow-up report, objective achieved. Organization destabilized, Leader B marginalized, internal investigation is now underway.
That's the reality. Dirty politics doesn't look dramatic, it looks organized. It's the mountain of paperwork required to destabilize an entire organization.
All to ensure there's a clear chain of command and bureaucratic accountability. Not ethical accountability, mind you, but operational accountability for achieving the goal of neutralization. It's the banality of evil in action.
And what's truly mind-boggling is how this massive bureaucratic program, operating for 15 years, was actually exposed. It wasn't through internal oversight or a whistleblower or even Congress.
No, COINTELPRO was exposed entirely by accident, or I guess by proactive citizens. It was exposed because activists broke into a small FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania in 1971.
And they just stole the documents.
Physically stole thousands of classified documents. They published them, sent them to journalists and lawmakers, and for the first time, the public had undeniable, irrefutable proof of the state's massive domestic sabotage program.
It took an external, unauthorized act of theft to pull back the curtain on the bureaucracy of disruption.
It did. And after the public exposure, Congress investigated, we got the church committee hearings, reforms were promised, and the program was officially ended.
But by the time the program was officially ended, the damage was already permanent. The irreversible toll had been paid. The state had already won the critical political battle of the 1960s.
Absolutely.
We're talking about movements that were fractured beyond any hope of repair. Leaders were murdered, jailed, or just completely discredited through years of sustained harassment.
And maybe most damaging for any future organizing, the foundational trust between activists was just poisoned.
Think about that institutional trauma. When you know that any organizational disagreement could be a planted agent, or any piece of information could be a rumor designed to split you up, how do you ever build a functioning, unified movement again?
You can't. The program successfully created an atmosphere of pervasive paranoia. And even when the agents left, the paranoia remained, continuing the work of internal destruction long after the files were closed.
So the effective COINTELPRO survived its official existence because it successfully dismantled the organizational structures, the personal relationships, the trust, everything necessary for these movements to function.
It achieved a strategic victory that lasted for decades.
And that leads to the final, really sobering lesson of this dirty politics playbook, one that we have to internalize.
And that is, you don't have to win forever. You just have to win at the moment that matters.
By aggressively disrupting these groups during that critical period of mobilization in the 60s and early 70s, the outcome of those political and social movements was permanently altered.
The momentum was broken, and it never truly returned in that same unified form. COINTELPRO matters, not just as a historical event, but because it revealed a scalable, repeatable method.
A method that avoids the messy, obvious tools of censorship or dictatorship.
Exactly. Instead, it relies on strategic pressure, on bureaucratic incentives, and on the silence and confusion that allows these psychological tactics to just flourish.
The genius, as we've been saying this whole time, was the plausible deniability woven into every single tactic. Every infiltration, every legal challenge, every anonymous letter.
It could all be defended and justified externally. And critically, every organizational collapse could ultimately be and was blamed on the movement itself.
It was the ultimate successful prototype for how to manage and neutralize domestic opposition without resorting to visible tyranny.
That's it.
The paperwork may have stopped in 1971, but the logic didn't. The enduring lesson of COINTELPRO is terrifyingly simple. If you want to eliminate a political threat, don't attack the idea directly.
No. You control the relationships, you corrode the trust, and you let the movement collapse under its own manufactured internal weight.
And that leads to the provocative thought we want to leave you all with today.
If the key tactic is making sure that power looks like a passive bystander while internal conflict destroys an organization, how does this method translate into today's hyper-connected, social media-driven world?
That's a huge question.
It is. What does a modern, low-paper, distributed COINTELPRO look like when division and psychological warfare can be deployed instantly, globally, and anonymously through digital means? That is the real consequence of this playbook for our current moment.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, let us know in the comments what really stood out to you in this conversation and if there's any related topic or new topic that you would like covered in a future video.